I'm Lindsay Bugbee from the Postman's Knock, and today I am here to chat with you about oblique pens. So the first thing that I wondered when I saw an oblique pen for the first time is, what is that thing for? Like, what does it do? So oblique pens generally are for right-handed people. There are left-handed obliques, but the vast majority of oblique pen users are right-handed. And what an oblique pen does is it corrects, well, not necessarily corrects, it steers your writing angle so that it's easier to make a right-leaning slant. So for example, you can see that as a right-handed person, it's really difficult for me to come from the right here and also make this right-leaning slant. I really have to turn my paper in order to get the sides of my nib parallel to these slant lines, which is your goal if you want to make a right-leaning slant. So this oblique pen takes that work out for you. You can have your paper at more of a, some would say, reasonable angle, and the flange automatically positions the nib to a degree that it's going to be easier to write with that 55-degree-ish slant. Okay, so that's what they're for. There are a couple of different ways to hold an oblique pen. The traditional way is to put your index finger on top, and then your thumb is on the side here, and your other fingers are below. But some people do much better if their fingers are up a little more. And I personally hold it more where my index finger is on the right. My thumb touches the flange here like this, and then my fingers are underneath. So instead of the traditional grip of having my index finger on top, it's over here. Just experiment and see what works for you. Whatever is most effective for you is exactly what you should go with. One thing that can be really confusing for calligraphy beginners, especially if you're used to using a straight pen, is the fact that one oblique pen doesn't fit a whole bunch of different nibs. So with the straight pen, you decide, okay, I want to work with a Nico G nib, which is a pretty big nib. It fits right in there. You switch it out, you want to work with the Browse Extra Fine 66 nib, it also goes right in there. Well, so let's say you want to use an oblique pen with your Browse Rose nib. Great, it fits right in there, it's good to go. But then you try to put the Extra Fine 66 in the same flange. It just doesn't work because the size of the shank is not what this flange is fitted for. And that's the same with the Nico G. Since this flange is fitted for the rose, it's really tight because the rose has this shank that's very thin. The Nico G doesn't have a thin shank, so it can't fit into the rose oblique very well, right? So there are a couple of solutions that you can do for this problem. The first, which is my preferred method, is to just have, a couple of different oblique pens for the couple of different nibs that you like to use. So I often use an Extra Fine 66 nib, so I have this oblique pen that I use all the time with my Extra Fine 66 nib. I also have a Rose oblique, and then I have a Nico G oblique. So I just keep those all handy. It's nice because you can just keep the nib in the pen, and when you're ready to use it, just grab the pen and write with it. If you want to, you can purchase a universal oblique pen. These aren't incredibly common and they're pretty expensive. This one is an awesome one. I got it off of Paper and Ink Arts. I think it was around $50 or $60, and you can only order 3 at a time because they're custom made for Paper and Ink Arts. But basically, you can put in all different sizes of nibs. So if I wanted to fit the Nico G in there, I would just take a screwdriver and, unscrew the flange a little bit to loosen it. I think I have it fit right now for the Extra Fine 66. Yep. So it can use all kinds of different nibs, but the disadvantage to it is you can't really adjust the flange, which I'll show you in a second. All right, let's talk about adjusting the flange. This is part of the reason that you'll want a brass-flanged oblique pen. A lot of times when you go into craft stores, you'll see an oblique pen that looks like this, And really this pen is not helpful because A, it doesn't give you the writing angle that you need, but B, you cannot adjust the flange up or down. With a brass flange, you can. All right, so let's say that you are writing and your nib is catching on the paper a lot because you're coming at the page with too drastic of an upright angle. All you do is hold on to it with your right hand and then put your index finger of the left hand underneath the flange, put the thumb on top, and pull up on the flange. That will give the flange a little less of a drastic angle. So then as you're writing, you're forced to hold the pen at a closer angle to the page. If you're having a problem where your ink is just way too thick when it comes down, you're not getting nice dainty upstrokes, then you do the opposite. You hold on to the pen the same way, but you push down on the flange as you rotate your pen out to the right. That's going to give you more of an upright angle with the flange, and then you can achieve some really nice thin strokes. If you have a nib that's not fitting in your pen for whatever reason, there are a couple of things you can do. So let's say you wanted to put a Nico G nib in this pen. The flange is a little tight for this nib, so all you have to do is wiggle the nib or the flange up and down very gently to coax that nib down into there. Perfect. So that kind of loosens up the brass a little bit and gives the nib some room to go in. Now let's say you want to go back to this brass rose and it's just a little too loose, which it is. The nib comes out a little too easily. What you're going to do is either get some jewelry tools, so this would be preferred, or needle nose pliers, which is what you can use if you don't have the jewelry tools, and just squeeze that flange back together around the nib, which will make it tighter around the nib, okay? So that's the reason we like brass. It's just a little more adjustable than this universal insert, which is brass, but you know, you can't really tighten it up with pliers. And you know, we certainly don't love this. So you might wonder how to assemble an oblique pen. What you do is you insert the blunt end of the nib, that's called the shank, into the little fold here, and then just push it in until, if you had an imaginary line running up through the center of this pen, the nib would touch it. That's exactly what you do. For that reason, you do not want to get a plastic flanged oblique, because look at this. Okay, if we put in a nib to this plastic flanged oblique, the tip of the nib goes out way past the center line of the pen, and it's even worse when you put the Nico G nib in. So do not use this pen if you can help it. A brass flange is always the way to go. The last thing I want to say is, of course, brass and metals don't react very well with water. So anytime you are cleaning your brass oblique pen, make sure that you do not get any moisture up in the pen. So you're always just interacting with water and ink up until maybe the nib reservoir. So that's the hole in the center of the nib. Never, ever up into the flange. Then when you're done, dry it off. To store the pen, you can either store it upright in a cup with the nib in it, or you can take the nib out and store your oblique pen anywhere. Okay, I think that's it. I am just going to close this out by writing out some letters for you to some music, and I hope you enjoy.